What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Friday afternoon. Got a lot to get into after the first round of the NFL draft. We're going to talk about the three Georgia players that were taken in the first 32 picks, including one staying close to home and going to the Atlanta Falcons. We'll talk generally about the first round, what stood out to us, what we're watching for going into the second round Friday night as well as the Georgia players we're watching to go in the next two rounds. Also, going to talk some recruiting, a couple commitment dates that have changed. Georgia basketball, Georgia baseball. So make sure and stick around. Subscribe to Dogs 24/7 on YouTube. Subscribe where you get your podcast and stick around for a good show. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Friday afternoon. And we have got a first round of the NFL draft to talk about. A lot to get into with several big-time moves and three Georgia Bulldogs being drafted in the first 32 picks. And we're going to take these one by one. But, I mean, come on. I know there's a lot of Atlanta Falcons fans listening. We got to say it. The Atlanta Falcons drafted a Georgia Bulldog. Kipp, we talked about it a little bit. I was seeing some mocks that had Jaylen Walker to the Falcons. We didn't want to get too excited as Falcons fans, but I got to set you up for this one, Kipp. I mean, they did it. The Falcons actually did
it. They finally did it. And you know what? It's only been what? I think 70 years since the Falcons did this. So I think they were due. And yeah, I'll be honest. If the Falcons were going to take a Georgia player, I don't think any of us actually thought that it would be Jaylen Walker. You know, we kind of thought maybe Michael Williams would be the pick. And we'll talk about that pick a lot in a little bit. But the 49ers did the Falcons a solid. I think if the 49ers take Jaylen Walker, I just don't think the Falcons would have taken Michael Williams. I think they would have gone in a different direction. I just think this was the perfect scenario, which we talked about on the board. And I think I tweeted it was just going too smoothly. Everything was falling into place. You had an offensive tackle run, a lot of defensive tackles coming off the board, which would have been a great value as well. But the amount of time it took the Falcons on the clock for Falcons fans, it was maddening. The fact that we happened to be the team that seemed to be taking our pick down to the wire, which maybe they were fielding trade calls, but it really wouldn't have made sense if it was a guy that they were probably dumbfounded was still on the board. But yeah, they gave themselves time to screw it up. And in the end, I'm glad no one answered the phone. And because that is a player that, as a Falcons fan, you want guys like that on the defense, guys that can be a captain for a decade, and guys that can do a little bit of everything. So, still in shock. I think Jaylen Walker is the kind of player that can overcome being an Atlanta Falcon and what that can do to someone who's taken in the first round. But outstanding job. You have to actually give credit where it's due to this franchise, because everyone's been yelling at them to fix this horrid defense for a decade, and that is a great first step.
Yeah, Falcons' first season was 1966. This is the first time they have taken a Georgia player in either the first or the second round. So history made there. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about Jaylen Walker in a few minutes, but I do want to give Ben a chance to react to that decision. You talked about, hey, let's see if bullying actually works. It looks like it did, and Terry Fontenot's number one fan, I have to imagine, is pretty thrilled with how it played out.
Well, I think, look, one, everything Kipp just said there, we just listened to 3 minutes of battered Falcons fan. Like, he was trying, like, we just had what I consider a great draft for a first round of a draft. And we can get into the other parts of it, which I know we will. But you had to hear Kipp say they waited too long on the clock. They were trying to field phone calls to mess up the pick. It's like 14 other teams just passed on Jaylen Walker. The Falcons didn't, and we can't, let's give credit where credit's due. The Falcons took the guy that everybody wanted them to. I think does this kill the narrative that the Falcons don't take Georgia players? I don't know whether it will or not. I think all it's going to take is next year's draft. Someone comes around that Georgia fans want the Falcons to take, and they don't take them, and all of a sudden the narrative will reemerge itself, I'm sure. But I also think, look, Jaylen Walker was the best player available at 15 when the Falcons were on the clock, and they picked the best player available. I think I differ in opinion from a lot of other people in thinking that I think Terry Fontenot has done that rightly in certain cases where he's gotten a lot of backlash. And I think that he did it again last night. Like, I think that Jaylen Walker, from a culture fit standpoint, and I'll say this too, I was at Pro Day and the Falcons were loaded with front office people there at Pro Day. And you could tell then, Jaylen Walker spent a lot of time intermingling with the Falcons front office. He was clearly on a close relationship with Terry Fontenot and with Jeff Ulbrich, defensive coordinator, and he lit up talking about the Falcons defense and the vision that they had for him. And I'll be honest with you, when I went back and listened to that clip from Pro Day and then also just looked at the quotes, and the more I think about it, the more I just don't think either side thought that Jaylen Walker was going to be available at 15. Like, they talked about how much they appreciated the relationship. Like, Jaylen even had the quote after he talked about Ulbrich being a visionary, where he said, even if I don't get there, like, those are guys that I want to maintain a lifelong relationship with just because of what I've built with them throughout the process. And so I think what happened was the Falcons were stunned that Jaylen Walker was available at 15. And the reason it might have taken longer on the clock is what we know now. I think the Falcons had another guy that they really liked at 15, and people might have debates over that player and that eval or whatever and him at 15. But I think they wanted him so badly at 15 that they needed to figure out while they were still on the clock, let's kill some time and figure out what we're potentially going to be able to do to still get James Pierce, because he was a guy that they really, really liked, clearly. And so, yeah, I think that's what was happening. And as Jordan says, as the number one fan of the Terry Fontenot fan club, I will advocate for any of these decisions that he's making until he makes one that I'm like, all right, let's blow the whole thing up. Which, for the record, for people that want my track record, I basically did the same thing with Travis Schlenk until it was like, all right, let's just cut bait on this one. So by no means take my opinion with any grain of salt whatsoever.
All right, let's go through each of the Georgia players that were picked in the first round. The first one off the board was at 11 overall. Mykel Williams goes to the San Francisco 49ers. 15 overall, as we were just discussing, Jaylen Walker goes to the Atlanta Falcons. Then a little bit of a wait until the 27th overall pick. Malachi Starks goes to the Baltimore Ravens. So let's start with Mykel. This was a fit that I thought made a lot of sense. This was a selection and a prediction I made when I went through my draft series and looked at everybody, backed off at the last day and said, I think New Orleans will get him, and said, just stick with your gut. But looking at Mykel to San Francisco, I talked about this on the CBS Sports pod where we were talking with the San Francisco 49ers, sort of their coverage of the 49ers, that I love this maybe as much for Mykel as I do the 49ers. And I say that because you pair him with Nick Bosa. Not only does that kind of take pressure off of Mykel to be the guy setting the edge and being a big-time pass rusher, but he gets to learn from Nick Bosa. He gets a situation where he learns from one of the best pass rushers, one of the best edge rushers in the sport. He goes to a team that we know has a winning background. Obviously, they took a step back last year, but I don't know that anyone would be surprised if we saw them compete in that NFC West and be a contender again in the NFC. I really like this fit for Mykel. I think he's got a lot of potential. I know a lot of folks were kind of asking questions, a little bit concerned, looking at his statistics, maybe his lack of production at Georgia. But, to me, so much of how these guys pan out and how things work out for their NFL careers, it's about location, it's about the right fit and being put in a situation to win. Pair him with Nick Bosa. You have Robert Saleh back calling that defense. I really like that fit for Michael. I think it will be a productive start to his NFL career, that he will make an impact there in San Francisco. Kipp, what did you think about Michael landing with the 49ers and what it means for San Francisco adding him to their defense?
I think you hit on the key point there, is that he's a perfect fit as a 4-3 defensive end opposite Nick Bosa. I think on passing downs, they might actually slide him inside a little bit. I know they had Drake Jackson there, but he hasn't really, panned out so far. So I think it's a situation where Michael will probably slide right into his starting role. And you kind of saw, because I also thought Michael would go to the Saints, but there was a run on offensive tackles. You knew Will Campbell was probably going to go to the Patriots, and then you had Armand Membu go. I think he went to the Jets at number 7, and all of a sudden you have this offensive tackle run with Kelvin Banks going to the Saints at 9. I think Michael was either going to go 9 or 11, and I think that the 49ers were looking offensive tackle as well. So I think they knew that they were just going to get the player that the Saints didn't take, and they were able to just sit back and see who fell to them. And the 49ers were kind of that sneaky fit for Michael Williams, because they did a lot of, investigation behind the scenes. They had him on one of their 30 visits, and they took a guy that kind of is the best of both worlds for them, and that he's 20 years old, so there's a lot of upside, but he's also a guy that showed a lot of maturity. I mean, he got banged up with that ankle injury and came back after 2 games. And we talked all the pre-draft narrative about Michael Williams was, him being hurt and not testing as well as people thought because of the injury. But the flip side of that is the guy came back from an injury after 2 games and then played at 60-70% the rest of the season in a role that, doesn't get you allow you to pad your stats, and never complained. And I think that actually shows a ton of maturity. So I think the 49ers, again, got the best of both worlds, with a guy with a lot of upside, but a guy who's mature and has a leadership quality about him that they can plug in. And that defense is already incredible. I think that it's just going to allow him to really shine as not having to be the guy, but also just going into a culture that is pretty similar to what Kirby Smart's built in Athens.
Yeah, we've seen San Francisco pick a couple of Georgia players these past few years. I know they got Robert Beal, Charlie Warner. That's going back a little bit further, but really like that addition for San Francisco. Ben, what do you think about Michael landing out there in the NFC West and his potential getting started as a 49er?
I really don't know what it is, but for some reason, when I saw him in the 49ers hat and I saw some of the graphics of him and, mock-up 49ers jerseys, like, it just fits. Like, he just looks like a 49er. It's crazy. I don't know how to explain it, but it makes sense. I think it's, like you said, from a football standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. And obviously with success they've had with pass rushers in the past, like, I think that he's going to have a lot of success there. I think it's a great fit. But yeah, I don't know. There's just something I felt that same way with Ashton Genty with the Raiders stuff on. I was like, I don't know. There's just something here. It just feels like the right fit. Just when you look at them in the jerseys, I don't know. It's not even the real jerseys. It's the, AI generated ones or whatever, however they're doing them these days. But I don't know. It makes sense. And I think Kipp's right. I hadn't really thought about it, but had the 49ers taken Jaylen, or had it shaken out differently at 9 and 10 with one of those teams taking Jaylen, like, I don't know that Michael would have made it to 15, or that had he made it to 15, that the Falcons would have gone with him at 15. And there's, a world now where James Pierce was going for the Falcons at 15, I feel like. And so, I don't know. I feel like it worked out well. And to Kipp's point, like, the 49ers kind of did the Falcons a favor if you're living in the world of, the Falcons really wanted Jaylen Walker and he was the best player available. I'm sure the 49ers feel awesome about having Michael Williams right now, though. As far as Georgia's, there's a reason he was Georgia's first player drafted this year. I think when you say best case scenario for every player that comes through, I think his ceiling is the highest out of everyone that got drafted this year. And I think that, again, best case scenario, I think you're talking, 10, 15 year guy that is, exactly what the 49ers are looking for a defensive end.
I totally agree with his ceiling. It'll just be an opportunity for him to put it together. And we'll talk now about that 15th pick with Jaylen Walker. And we had a thread going on the Junkyard as the picks were going on, and we were talking about, is there really about to be a situation where Michael and Jaylen Walker are on the board and the Falcons don't take either? I was going to go ahead and act like I was sick for the weekend, couldn't be on the board if that's how it played out. Michael is picked, and then you get to that 15th pick, and then Jaylen Walker is the pick. Kipp, just talk about the fit for the Falcons, getting Jaylen Walker, sort of what you see as his role on the defense, and what Jeff Ulbrich is getting to work with by adding Jaylen Walker.
There is no aspect of the Falcons defense that does not need help. They need help, stopping the run. They need help in coverage. They definitely need to find ways to get to the quarterback. And what Jaylen Walker brings to the table is the ability to do everything well and overall just speed. I think they talked about his pressure rate. He's a guy that can use speed to get to the quarterback. He could drop back and he could spy quarterbacks. We've seen him do that often, from the press box. It seems like you could see people yelling at the Georgia coaching staff to put Jaylen Walker in at spy, because every time they did it, it seemed to be effective when they needed to do that. I think from a leadership standpoint, you couldn't have done any better. The heart and soul of Georgia's defense, and someone who just is as high character as you can get. You have to love that kind of makeup when you have a defense that doesn't have an identity. I think now the challenge for Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich is the fact that Jaylen Walker could do everything pretty well. It's the same that we talked about with the Georgia coaching staff. You have to find a way to take his unique skill set, because he is, 6'1", 243 pounds. He's not the perfect makeup of an edge rusher. But you have to find a way to find what he can be amazing at. What can he be elite at? You have to take one skill set from him and maximize it to get the most out of this pick. And he's a guy that if you use 1/3 of the snaps off the edge, if you use him blitzing 1/3, maybe that's the role that works. But you have to get him into a mindset to where he's able to play fast and not think about what he's doing, because he's repeated the action enough. So really, again, it's going to be on this coaching staff to maximize this pick, but there's no doubt that his unique abilities made him the best overall player, at 15. And I think for the defense is exactly what the Falcons needed. It's just someone who can, do everything well, bring unique ability, and bring a lot of leadership. So for me, I mean, I haven't even looked at any grades, because there's no way that you can, you can't fault the coaching staff for taking this player, knowing that everyone had projected them to take someone else. That's another conversation that we had later. Ben had brought it up, but the fact that he was on the board and they didn't chicken out and they took him, credit to them. But I think that it's a perfect fit for Jaylen Walker to kind of stay home and play for the Falcons.
To your point about grades, I wrote a story on Friday morning looking at about 8 different NFL draft experts with their grades on all 3 of these Georgia players who were picked. I would encourage, if you're listening or watch this, go check it out. The average grade between those 8 for the Jaylen Walker pick was an A-, which for the Falcons is just about as good as I've ever seen them do, especially in the first round. Ben, additional thoughts on Jaylen Walker to the Falcons and how you see him fitting in on this Atlanta defense?
Well, I'll say this. I'm glad that it was Jaylen Walker, because I think that if you're the first Georgia player ever drafted by the Falcons in the first round, there's going to be a lot of interest and buzz around your career and the success that you're going to have. Like, I don't want to say pressure, but like there's going to be pressure on Jaylen Walker to have the type of career that he almost is expected to have now because he was finally kind of breaking this barrier that ultimately is an irrelevant barrier, though I understand why it's not irrelevant to certain people. Like, I get it. He is the type of guy and has the type of makeup that I have no concerns whatsoever about being able to manage and navigate all of that. Like, he is a perfect culture fit for any building that he is walking into. And so for that, I think that alone makes him a perfect fit. I also just think it's cool. His brother's going to be playing at Georgia State this year as well. So him and his brother are both going to be playing in Atlanta. And, I just think that's a cool element to it too. So it's a great fit. Like, it just makes sense. And I would have been trying my hardest to backpedal and find ways to explain why it was an okay pick had the Falcons not taken Jaylen Walker at 15. And so I'm very glad that they took him at 15 because I think it just made all the conversations a lot easier today.
Yeah, you don't really have to kind of twist it or try to find a way to explain it away. Really love the pick as a Falcons fan. Jaylen Walker, a guy that like Ben said, I mean, to me, I think of a guy that's the son of a college football coach. Like, he sort of understands what he's walking into. And, he was always level-headed at Georgia. He always did what was asked of him. And it is interesting now to sort of watch the Falcons have to sort of do the same thing that Georgia did, where Georgia's coaches had to find the best role for Jaylen. I thought at times that Georgia didn't do a great job of that. I thought that in the 2023 season, you saw times where you were sort of wondering why Jaylen wasn't out there more. And I think, we will see some of that probably in his rookie year as they try to figure it out, just like everyone who's watching. But the thing that I am fascinated with when you look at this from a Falcons perspective is just how significantly they have overhauled this pass rush. You get Jaylen Walker, you get James Pierce, who we will talk about in a little bit. I had honestly forgotten about Braylon Trice, who I thought looked really good as a rookie in preseason last year, but he got hurt. But Braylon Trice will be back. You bring in Leonard Floyd. If it works out, we'll just have to see one way or the other. But I do commend the Falcons for saying, okay, what's our biggest weakness? It was very clearly pass rush. They addressed that by getting Jaylen Walker, and then they addressed it again later in the first round by trading back in to get James Pierce. And even if it doesn't work out, I commend them for making these two picks because you can't say they're not trying.
I'm now reacting to you saying it was an A-. How could they have done any better? Like, who could they have taken at 15 that would have gotten them like the A? I mean, like, it's 2 pegs down. How is it not an A+? Like, Will Johnson is still on the board for everyone because of medical red flags at this point. Like, who could they have taken that improve these grades? Like, the Falcons are always the program that gets D's, F's. Everyone laughs at these picks. And now when they make the pick that's a home run pick, they're still not getting the credit that I think they deserve. I'm flabbergasted by that because, I mean, any other player that's, the projections, it still hasn't been picked. Like, Mike Green hasn't been picked yet. The edge from Marshall, like all of these guys, like, are they trying to suggest that a guy like Shamar Stewart or Walter Nolan like would have gotten them a better grade? I don't believe them. And so I want to call them out for that. I feel like they're being hypocritical right here because, as we said, like, this is as good a pick as you could have taken. You can't say that in the pre-draft process that he's a potential top 5 pick. He was 4 to 6 on most boards as far as overall players, and yet the Falcons take him at 15, and now he's 6'1". Now he's not the prototypical edge guy, so they get docked for that, for what we already knew months ago. So guys, get your grades in order. Give the Falcons their flowers for taking a guy that was 5th or 6th on most big boards at 15. I mean, you can't look at the other player they taken and affect this grade. It's purely in this pick, and it should have been at worst an A, but it should have been an A+. He was a perfect pick for the Falcons.
Are we going to hash out the Pierce pick at 26 now, or are we going to do that later?
Let's save that. We'll,
Okay.
we'll keep the people listening and keep them hanging on. And yeah, Kip, to your point, I think it's some of the tweener talk of like, oh, we don't really know how they're going to use him. But I mean, I'm not defending it. There at that pick, there's no one I would have rather the Falcons picked as a Falcons fan. So I'm with it. A plus. They got some A pluses from some of the experts. I think there was some concern there with how they'll utilize him, but that's kind of more of a Falcons problem than a Jaylen Walker problem. I mean, he's got the skill set. We're just going to have to see how they are able to put it together. All right, the third and final Georgia player that was taken in the first round, 27th overall, Baltimore Ravens select Malachi Starks. I did have that in my projections. This was a guy that, and I saw this point made by several different people once the pick was made, that he just looks like a Baltimore Raven. And Baltimore is in that class, that tier of NFL franchise where the Philadelphia Eagles are, where they just don't force picks. I mean, they just let the board come to them. They're picking 27th. You know, a lot of teams would be panicking. A lot of teams may feel like we got to trade up to get a guy of value. Baltimore just sits back and gets another safety to pair with Kyle Hamilton. I really feel for fans of other AFC North teams because Kyle Hamilton and Malachi Starks together, I just think that's going to be a ferocious 1-2 duo at safety. Kip, what did you think of Malachi going to Baltimore and what the Ravens are getting in him?
Well, first off, yeah, it must be nice to let the draft fall to you when you're picking in the late 20s. It took everything for the draft to fall the way the Falcons fans wanted at 15. So I can't even fathom what it's like to be a Ravens fan. But yeah, I thought the Packers might be a fit at 24, but I thought they kind of reached for guard and took Donovan Jackson. So credit to you for your projection. Baltimore makes a lot of sense. And it's not just him pairing with Kyle Hamilton, which is just a ridiculous safety duo. I mean, you don't even have to worry about a position for the next decade. So again, must be nice. But I just think because of his versatility, you're going to not just allow Kyle Hamilton to play the deep safety where he excels at, but you just have guys that can a bunch of guys that can play nickel, like our Darius Washington and Marlon Humphrey. They can play all over the field. You just have chess pieces now in your secondary to where you can just move those guys wherever you want to and give so many different looks because they can all play different roles. They can all cover the slot. They can all cover outside if needed. I mean, Malachi Starks can play man. So I just think because of that speed and versatility and the fact that you just know that he's got the high football IQ, has the production, durable player. Yeah, I just think that is an outstanding pick for them and a home run pick, really. I just think you're going to get a lot of production out of your secondary now, out of your safety duo. I can't even think of a more athletic safety duo right now than those two guys from Georgia. So credit to Baltimore. And yeah, I mean, for Malachi, it's an outstanding opportunity to go in there, play with someone he's familiar with, and play with an outstanding defensive secondary to where, he's not going to be asked to do as much as he was last season. I mean, now you go in there and you're playing with a bunch of elite defensive backs at the NFL level, and they're going to welcome you in and allow you to learn and grow during your rookie season. I just think he's really set up for success in Baltimore.
Yeah, like you mentioned, once Donovan Jackson was picked, once the Vikings made that pick, it kind of felt like a no-brainer that he was going to wind up in Baltimore. And I know Philly is the popular pick for Georgia fans of like, that's the NFL team, not the Falcons that I would follow. Baltimore's going to be pretty fun with Roquan Smith and Malachi Starks on defense. I'd say that's not a team, that would be one of the teams I would really follow if I was a Georgia fan. Ben, what do you think of Malachi to Baltimore and what he's going to bring to that defense?
Well, and everyone's favorite offensive coordinator as well. But there's a few teams in the league that I feel like just have the general respect of everyone. It's like the Eagles, maybe the Eagles more recently, but the Eagles, the Ravens, the Packers, the Steelers, the 49ers, I guess you could even sort of throw in there as well. Like, people just respect these franchises, and they're also the franchises that have been drafting Georgia players highly in NFL drafts. Like, it's probably not a coincidence. It's probably further validation that the Falcons should be doing this more regularly than they have been, because it's working for a lot of these teams. And to your point, I think Malachi Starks just fits as a Raven. You talk about that safety duo. I mean, Kyle Hamilton, for starters, John Harbaugh clearly respects recruiting rankings. Kyle Hamilton was number one safety in the 2019 class. Malachi Starks was listed as an athlete, number one athlete, but was the highest rated safety in the 2022 class. They got both of those guys now as their safeties. Like, that's what 5 stars look like. That's what NFL first round safeties look like. John Harbaugh clearly sees that. And again, Malachi Starks, much like Jaylen Walker, a guy who is going to fit any culture that he walks into. I have no concerns about Malachi Starks and the way that he is going to be able to immerse himself in any NFL locker room. Like, he's just going to be a great culture fit for anywhere that he goes. And, Kip, you said, like, the Falcons took everything they could to see the draft fall to them at 15. They couldn't even see the draft fall to them at 27. The Falcons had to go and do something before it could even get to 27. So credit to the Ravens for, holding firm and, sticking at 27 and getting a guy that I imagine was someone that they had eyed from the very beginning of the process.
And I said this before the draft, and I only feel more strongly about it knowing Malachi is a Baltimore Raven. To me, if you told me only one of these 3 Georgia players truly hits in the NFL, truly becomes, I don't know if necessarily a star, but lives up to that first-round billing, I said it would be Malachi Starks, and I feel really good about that projection before, just because of getting a chance to play on a really good defense. I think that he was really dinged unfairly in this draft process by maybe his lack of production this past season at Georgia, because Georgia threw a lot at him. They asked him to start playing some nickel once the season basically started. If I'm remembering right, Malachi said he really had not been practicing there in the preseason, and Janelle Aguero gets hurt, and they're kind of trying to find an answer, and Malachi starts working there. I'm a big Malachi Starks believer. I think he's going to be great there, and super excited to see what he does, because the one thing I think you can say for all 3 of these teams that pick Georgia players, all 3 of them could very well be in the playoffs this upcoming season. We're not looking at a situation with any of these 3 players where, man, Cleveland picked one of these guys, or, just a perennial bottom feeder. The one you would probably say of the 3 is the Falcons, but I do like where they are in the NFC South and what they're working on and trying to get Michael Penix moving in the right direction. I think that these guys are set up for success. Sometimes you see some of these first-round picks and you kind of grimace and you go, good luck. You're talented, but you're in a really rough situation. I really like where all 3 of these guys found themselves. And I think kind of, again, if the Falcons can figure out how exactly to maximize Jaylen's skill set, all 3 of these guys can be very successful and very quickly. All right. Going to talk about the other part of the Atlanta Falcons draft. They traded back in and they picked at the number 26 overall pick to move up there. They traded with the Los Angeles Rams. They gave up their 2nd-round pick this year. They gave up a 7th-round pick this year, and they gave up their 1st-round pick next year, and they got the 26th overall pick this year, and they also got a 3rd-round pick this year. They go get James Pierce, the edge rusher from Tennessee, a guy that had been projected to be the number 15 pick for the Falcons. And I think this was Josh Kendall at The Athletic who pointed this out, and I've seen other people make this point as well, that it sort of feels like it was a situation where, as Ben talked about earlier in this episode, the Falcons probably were not expecting Jaylen Walker to be on the board, but they were really big on James Pierce. So they decided to double dip and to go make that trade. I know just based on our Dogs 24/7 group chat that there was a little bit of back and forth on if this was a good trade or not. Now, I'm going to start with Ben. What did you make of the trade? Just based on our text, I think you were okay with the trade. If that's the case, let's hear the rationale.
No, I am okay. I am okay with the trade. And honestly, I think I probably felt better about it this morning than I did last night. But what I will say, and I'll caveat it, and this is like middleman Ben answer right here, but like, if I understand those that feel that they should not have traded what they traded for this pick, I understand where people are coming from. I get it. I'm not saying that I like don't understand the perspective or whatever. What I'll say is the Falcons clearly like James Pierce. There are differing viewpoints on James Pierce. I don't even fully understand some of the red flags around James Pierce. It's obviously, I mean, I don't know whether you guys were watching on ESPN or NFL Network, but I was watching on NFL Network, and it comes on, and the second that it comes on or he gets picked, Ian Rappaport's up there saying the Falcons did serious vetting on this guy and they're confident in what they found in his background or whatever. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that there were a ton of these red flags around James Pierce and that he was someone that people might have concerns about. And I don't even fully know what they are. And so that was news to me in terms of any kind of like off the field concerns or whatever it is that it was driving people to not want to take him. As a player, I mean, look, I think the Falcons got the two best pass rushers from the best conference in football this past year. If you're just talking about pass rushing skill set, I think you get Jaylen Walker and you get James Pierce. I think the Falcons just got the two best. Now, some people might say, you know, they might throw out, you know, Shamar Stewart or other guys that they think have ability. I think that the Falcons got the two best. And so for that, look, did you give up a 2026 first rounder? Yes, but you also just got an extra 2025 first rounder. And so Kipp said this actually, and I think it's the perfect way of looking at it. Like, I think of James Pierce now as the Falcons 2026 first round pick, and you're just getting him a year early. Now, if you think of it that way, you're in essence saying that you moved down, you gave up a 7th round pick, which nobody's really going to lose any sleep about, and you're moving down about 55 picks from your second round pick at 46 to your 3rd round pick at 101, I believe it is, right? And so you're basically moving down 55 picks to get a first rounder for next year, a year early, that you felt really good about and probably would have taken at 15 had you not had a guy fall to you at 15 that you weren't expecting to be there. And so if your pushback on me is you don't love James Pierce as a prospect, I'll hear that, because I'm not going to sit here and act like I know enough about his back, you know, behind the scenes stuff or exactly what he's going to bring as a player. But I will say, like, James Pierce was a guy that a year ago people were talking about as potentially being a number 1 overall pick type of guy if he had the year that some people thought that he was going to have at Tennessee. Now, he didn't statistically have that type of year. I think that's part of the reason for the slide. There's obviously other reasons that are resulting in the slide as well, but I'm not too worried about not having a first round pick next year. Now, the part of this that does annoy people, I'm sure, Terry Fontenot needs to win now, right? Like, if the Falcons don't make the playoffs this year, or the Falcons win 6 games this year, he's not going to be there. So he doesn't care about that first round pick next year if they're not good. And if they are good, then that pick's going to be in the mid to late 20s. And they're not as worried about it because they just got a 26 the year before that. And so you can justify all of that. So the part that does annoy people is like this, to me, this is Terry Fontenot betting on the Falcons' success in the 2025 season. But what else is he going to do? Of course, he's going to bet on the team's success in the 2025 season, because if there's not success, then he's going to be gone, and he doesn't really care about the asset repercussions that come from that. And so that's the part where I'm sure people can be annoyed, and I understand it. But the Falcons needed help at pass rush. They got the two best from the best conference in football, in my opinion. And I think you got to be happy about that. Now you got to hit on that 3rd round pick. I do think that that's another part of this, where it's like, if you're going to make the conscious decision to drop, 55 picks for a guy that you're moving up to go get, like, you got to hit on that 3rd rounder now as well. Which has been my biggest issue with Fontenot is I think his first round picks have been fine. Everyone loves to be up in arms and be loud and complain about him. I think that it's all the other picks that he's made that have been the issue.
No, I would agree on that point specifically. Some of his later picks they've just not panned out since he's been in Atlanta. Kipp, before we get on the trade, I want to make sure I sort of understand the James Pierce sort of red flags that have been coming up. To my understanding, it's sort of just his motivation. I mean, his want to. Is that a fair sort of explanation just based on what you've seen when it comes to Pierce?
Yeah, it's not anything specific, because there's a lot of sourcing involved. You're having to kind of get inside the Tennessee program a bit, so you can't really burn those sources, I would believe. I think it's more along the lines of his love of football, the fact that he wasn't in the building sometimes when they wanted him to be. It was he would do workouts on his own sometimes instead of being with the team. And so it was for the Tennessee coaching staff, I think probably wasn't the ideal situation for one of their best players for them to have to kind of handle him with kid gloves a little bit, because he was doing his own thing at certain times is what I read. So yeah, you have some question marks regarding his football character. But we've seen that before. I mean, we've talked about it with, Jalen Carter going to the draft. And, that was a big topic as well. As far as talent was concerned, I think a lot of people thought he was possibly the second best pass rusher in this draft. It was just that not specific character concerns is all that we know on our side. But teams had to, they know. They spend millions of dollars to do this research. They know. So we can go ahead and just put a pin in that and say that the Falcons did their work, and now they'll have to stand by it.
So what do you think of the trade and the Falcons getting back in the first round to get Pierce?
I'll say this to begin with. I think Simone Biles would have been jealous of the mental gymnastics that Ben just did on this trade. And I get it. And he's right. This front office is like, you know what? We're going to gladly pay you for this cheeseburger. We'll pay for it next week. And next week's problem is the next staff's problem if it doesn't pan out. And the price they paid for this, it's a huge gamble because you don't know where this pick's going to be. You have a young quarterback or inexperienced quarterback in Michael Penix with some injury history, but it's the full gamut. For this trade to really be fair value, the Falcons have to be picking in the early to mid 20s. They have to go. I think 11-6 is the floor for this to have been. If you're going to get into draft capital, which I agree with Ben, it gets blown up a lot, but in the end of the day, they got to be. I'll just say 23rd in the draft next year, and then you could say, okay, that was the point value of where they should have been. As a player, James Pierce reminds me of a slightly more athletic Leonard Floyd, so it makes perfect sense to have a guy already on your roster and Leonard Floyd to kind of show him how to play. I can't complain about who they got because we've spent every year complaining about the Falcons not addressing the pass rush every single year. Everyone brings up John Abraham. I bring up Patrick Kearney. We're talking about the 90s. The last time that they actually said, you know what, let's get this done. They took Takk McKinley, but they had TJ Watt was there. So even then they goofed it up. So they haven't done a good job in this. So now they doubled down. So I understand from a need standpoint why they did it. But I can't sit here and also praise the Baltimore Ravens for letting the draft fall to them and then also watching the Falcons basically make a panic move to jump up when there were multiple pass rushers still on the board that just wait until the second round or send a second round pick. It would have made I think they overpaid because they couldn't believe the guy they almost drafted at 15 was still there. But that's just not what the good teams do. They don't make these kinds of moves and go, oh, we got to go get them. Like those kind of aggressive moves usually are for teams that are desperate. As a Falcons fan, I know they're desperate. But I'll flip it. I'll actually go the opposite direction. But I'll pretend that the Falcons took James Pierce at 15 and Jaylen Walker's their 2026 first round pick. And it's a lot more palatable that way. It just seems when next year's draft's rolling around and you hope the Falcons pick that going to the Rams is in the 20s. It seems like that's great value. So I agree. I'm also not really worried about the second rounder. They would have screwed that up. They did last year when they traded up in the second round. And so not really worried about that. But yeah, Jaylen Walker, your 2026 first round pick for the Falcons. Good job by them. And yeah, I mean, you've now addressed the biggest need. My only other thought on this is it really hurts even more that Grady Jarrett's gone. This is what Grady Jarrett deserved. You've done it, and now he's gone. I just think his leadership and being a mentor, he have been invaluable to these guys. So credit for them for addressing it, but I'm still going to give a little bit of criticism because you can do the right thing the wrong way. And I think that's kind of what the Falcons did here.
No, I think I kind of go more with Kipp on this. I can see the appeal of why they did this, and I totally get it from the Terry Fontenot perspective because it's like, brother, if this pick is not in the top, is not 20 on, which to me, if you're like, what is going to take this to be a success, aside from James Pierce hitting in the NFL, it's that next year the Falcons have to pick from like 21 to 32. 32 would mean they win the Super Bowl. I mean, come on. But that's what it will take. So I get why Terry did it. I'm kind of with Kipp where it's like, why not just wait out the rest of the first round? There's a decent chance that James Pierce is still there at the end of the second round. And, you've got a fairly early pick in the second round. If you want to move up with a situation where there's, maybe a team that wants to go move up and get a quarterback, that he might be within arm's reach and you don't have to give up that 2026 first round. At the same time, ever since 28-3, I just want the Falcons to be enjoyable. I'm not really looking for stability. And they went and got 2 pass rushers. And at the end of the day, I'm going to take that and I'm going to say, yeah, they gave up a lot to do it, but they've at least taken steps forward in the pass rush. And at this point, I'm willing to concede whatever it took to get there.
Did you all happen to listen to the phone call between the Falcons front office and James Pierce? So I don't know. This is all I think is all part of it too. This is me completely reading between the lines, making a ton of assumptions that are wildly irresponsible for me to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. It sounded to me like James Pierce was not super pleased to be on the phone at the time that he was on the phone. And Terry Fontenot, I think, even made the comment, or maybe it was Raheem Morris that made the comment that said, like, longer than you wanted it to be, I know. And he was just kind of like, uh-huh. And it's like, it almost felt to me like he was fully expecting the Falcons to be taking him at 15. And this was a conversation that was like, all right, I'm going to where I thought I was going to be going, but this is like not exactly how I envisioned it going. And I'm not saying that the Falcons, got like, emotionally coerced into going and trading back into the first round to get the guy that they had said. But it did almost feel to me, it was like, the Falcons said they were going to take this guy. And they almost felt like on their word, they needed to find a way to go get him because they had the ability to. Again, wild assumptions. I have no knowledge whatsoever if that's how it played out. But just listening to the conversation between them, I thought James Pierce sounded like a guy that was like, wait a minute, this was supposed to be happening 11 picks ago. What's going on here?
You were supposed to pick me up from school at 4:00 and it is 6:30. What the hell is going on? All right, let's talk about the rest of the first round. I want to just kind of get y'all's general thoughts. I was going to go through quickly to sort of set y'all up. The teams that I thought were winners in that first round. Cleveland, I thought, was a huge winner. I wouldn't have minded them staying put to get Travis Hunter, but I'm kind of the belief that all the Travis Hunter talk, his hype and his ceiling and what his stock is never going to be higher than it is right now. So Cleveland took advantage and went and traded with Jacksonville with a first-year GM, moved back, got a really great haul to move back 3 picks and still wound up with Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan. I really liked that pick. Was pretty cool with the Ashton Jeanty pick with Las Vegas. I kind of think that's more vibes than anything. Picking a running back that's that high, the hit rate, you really aren't sure on that one. Liked Walter Nolan going to the Arizona Cardinals. Excited to see what he does. Big defensive tackle, a guy that I kind of wondered if the Falcons might look at over the course of the draft. Green Bay Packers going to get Matthew Golden from Texas. This is the first time Green Bay has taken a wide receiver in the first round since Donald Driver in 2002. So that is going back. I like that pick. And then we talked earlier about Malachi, Baltimore. I liked that pick, and Jahad Campbell to Philly. I mean, Baltimore and Philly very much in the same bucket of they can't keep getting away with this, but they do. I'll start with you, Ben. Was there anything that you were particularly interested in from that first round? Any winners, any moments, anything you wanted to talk about?
Well, I just had this feeling someone was going to say, I love Travis Hunter so much that I'm going to try and find a way to get up to 2 to get him. I don't want to say I'm surprised at the Jags, but like first year head coach, like it very bold, like first move. And it makes sense. I can see both sides of that one where it's like, to your point, the Browns traded down only a few picks, got pretty good value, future value out of it. If they were considering potentially taking a quarterback, they might still be able to just get that guy at the beginning of the first round anyway, or second round anyway. So it sort of draft might have fallen to them. But I also like, if you're just like a casual football fan that wants to watch exciting football in Jacksonville, like I think it's awesome to have Travis Hunter on your team. Like again, I'm going to always, stump for my Gwinnett County folks, but like as a guy that gets talked about in Gwinnett County, like being the greatest Gwinnett County football player ever, like you're going to have fun watching Travis Hunter play football as long as he's healthy and you're able to watch him play. I think it'll be a polarizing, move or draft, but the Giants get the best pass rusher in the draft in Abdul Carter, and then they trade back into the first round. And honestly, I don't think they even really had to give up as much as the Falcons, or as close to what I guess the Falcons were having to give up to be able to get their quarterback. But Jackson Dart, I know it's controversial. And I guess another winner of the day, Shedeur Sanders haters. I know that people that were watching on ESPN especially got a lot of Shedeur Sanders coverage. I didn't catch that over on NFL Network as much. It was more just focused on the guys that were getting drafted. But, I think Jackson Dart's a great quarterback. I would have probably taken him as my number 2 quarterback off the board as well. That's, just how I felt about him as a prospect. That is not intended to be a slight on anybody other than him at quarterback. That's just how strongly I feel about Jackson Dart. And so I think that was a good move. Weird sort of, you talk about the Falcons last year, they signed Kirk Cousins, and they draft Michael Penix, like kind of weird by the Giants. They signed Jameis Winston. Then like a week later, they signed Russell Wilson, and then they end up drafting a guy over the top of both of them. I know slightly different contract situation than what the Falcons did with Kirk Cousins, but still interesting how they've handled quarterback this offseason. And then I got to go with the Packers. That moment was so awesome where the guy that was reading the pick had such a sense of the moment where it was like, all right, I'm not just going to announce the pick. I'm realizing the significance of the specific position that he's playing. And like the place went crazy. I've got a bunch of friends that live in Wisconsin now, big Packers fans, and everybody that I was talking to wanted Matthew Golden. So they got the guy that they wanted. And I really like that pick as well. He had, I think, 11 catches for 240 yards against Georgia this year, so that's good enough for me.
Kipp, what about you? Any first-round things that stood out, anyone or any team you want to shout out?
Well, I know the Falcons have it's been a huge narrative about how, we always use our first-round pick on offense. For the 4th year in a row, the Panthers go offense in the first round. They took Okongwu at left tackle. They have Bryce Young at quarterback, Xavier Legette last year, and Teteroa McMillan, the number 1 wide receiver in the draft this year. In a lot of minds, in mine as well. I just think he's got that alpha mentality. And looking at their roster, it seems like they don't have a number 1 receiver. I mean, I like Xavier Legette, but I don't think he's that kind of guy. Adam Thielen as well. I think he's a 3 at this point in his career at best. But yeah, I mean, this is year 3 for Bryce Young. He started to look a little better toward the end of the season, but getting him a number 1 made a lot of sense. So I think you looked at the defensive line class, because that was a lot of projections were that they were going to take a guy in the front 7. We thought maybe Jaylen Walker there, but you looked at this wide receiver class and knew that if I don't get this guy, we're probably going to go another season without giving Bryce Young a true number 1. So I just think that made a lot of sense. On the flip side, looking at the defensive line, I think a lot of teams reach just to bring in a defensive tackle. And when the Browns traded down, I'm like, Mason Graham. That was the guy. Like I thought maybe they would trade down twice, just get a bunch of picks because you have a lot of needs, but then they just stayed there. And I mean, I like Mason Graham, but you had a chance to take Abdul Carter, and you passed to get a guy that I just don't think has the same ceiling, even though it's a different position. But I just don't think he's going to be, that Myles Garrett kind of player. And you don't even know if you're going to be able to keep Myles Garrett long term. And now, I don't know. That pick confused me, and I think the teams just kept going. It cascaded because the Dolphins. I think that was a great fit for Malachi Starks. That's where I kind of thought that maybe his board would begin, and they needed a lot of help in the secondary, and they took Kenneth Grant. A great run defender, 331 pounds, I think. But I don't even think he was the best defensive tackle on the board. I would have taken Walter Nolan there. So I think that Grant's a good player, but I just think he's a nose tackle. You shouldn't be taking nose tackles in the top 15 unless you think that they're going to be able to play more than 25 snaps a game. I just think that's a luxury pick. And if you're picking 13th, you're not. You shouldn't be looking for luxury picks. So I think the defensive line team started just really reaching, in my opinion. Which, as a Falcons fan, I was looking at defensive tackle, and I think that a lot of teams just realized, okay, there's going to be a run on defensive tackles. Just cross that position off the big board because it kept going. I mean, Derek Harmon going number 21. It just they just kept going a little bit earlier than you thought they would.
I'll also add the Eagles kind of did it again, huh? I mean, they just sort of sat around, wait, and then all of a sudden, Jahad Campbell is just another Nick Saban or Kirby Smart guy is just sort of sitting around. I know it's not technically a Nick Saban guy, but he's a Nick Saban guy.
Can we also talk about Kelvin Banks' son throwing up as soon as he was picked by the Saints? Does anyone have a comment on that?
I mean, he's clearly a Falcons fan. That was all. It's all our reaction anytime the Saints logo is on the screen. That kid saw the Saints logo and had a perfectly normal reaction to seeing it. So, I'm a big fan of that kid. Looking forward to see what his future holds. But tough stuff. Now he knows where kind of the family, some of the income's coming from. He's probably gonna, tough spot for the dad there, knowing that his kid's probably gonna hold that against him growing up. But credit to the kid for just not being afraid to show his true feelings on national television.
I will say that, as people pointed out on Twitter, you could just say he's getting ready for life in New Orleans if his immediate reaction to finding out is vomiting. That'll fit in quite well in the Big Easy. All right, let's look before we change topics. Looking toward the draft, on Friday night you'll have the third and the fourth round. I want to talk about this from a Georgia perspective. Kip, who are the Georgia players you're kind of keeping an eye on, guys you think will go off the board on Friday night?
Yeah, I think this is where you have your interior offensive lineman. Jared Wilson was talked about as a possible first rounder. I think now, you look at the second round, this is where the center position starts to make sense as far as positional value. Whether or not he is the next Georgia player, I mean, Tate Ratledge is the guy that I think should be off the board by the end of the second round, probably just right there in the early 60s, 60 to 64 right there. Makes sense for him. So I think those are probably, your second round picks. Whether or not a third guy comes off in the third round, Small Munden, Dylan Fairchild start to make some sense there. But I think right now, two guys most likely, Tate Ratledge and Jared Wilson.
Those are the two I think will happen. I think I had Dylan Fairchild in the third round, but I think more than likely, Kip, you've hit on it between Jared Wilson and Tate Ratledge. Ben, is there one of these guys? Let's stick with Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge. Is there a team you'd like to see either one of these guys go to, or either one of those guys you're particularly interested in seeing where they end up?
I mean, Jared is the one that intrigues me. I think I saw, I don't know how I found myself here, but Houston Texans Twitter is like drooling itself over Tate Ratledge. They want Tate Ratledge. So I don't know if they're going to get Tate Ratledge or not, but I think I saw one of their main accounts this morning had like thousands of retweets that was saying like, 6 more picks or however many picks it is until they pick like 6 more picks until we get this. And it's just a picture of Tate Ratledge, mullet out, dripping sweat, just like the full ultimate Tate Ratledge photo. So I hope for the Houston fans, because that's like a weird, like off the wall, random guy that you're choosing to, want to be your guy in the draft. I hope for them that they get him. But Jared Wilson, I'm just fascinated because like we just haven't seen a lot of Jared Wilson. We've almost heard more stories about Jared Wilson through the years than we have actually seen him play. Like we got such a small sample size of his one real year at Georgia, and the athleticism is off the charts. And that's why he's able to go really after 1 year and why he's going to be a 2nd round pick possibly. And so whoever takes him is getting a potential freak show type of guy where, I know not a ton of centers are going in first rounds these days, but the type of guy where you're getting almost a first round type of talent at the center position. And so, I don't know that the team that drafts him tonight, the team that drafts him will know. The fan base that's drafting him tonight, I don't think fully will get what they're getting until, potentially a couple years down the line.
Yeah, I really like Jared Wilson there. Kipp had him going off the board first between he and Tate Ratledge. And to that point that Ben made about the Texans, that would line up with what Kipp's projection was. He had Tate Ratledge to the Texans at the 58th overall pick. Before we go to a break, Kipp, so the Falcons do not have a 2nd round pick. They'll pick again in the 3rd round. It's hard to know at this point who will still be available, but what's a position you would like to see the Falcons address, and maybe a guy or two you think could still be around by the time they pick again?
Yeah, at this point, saying what I said about the Panthers and them upgrading at wide receiver, the Falcons could use some help at cornerback. So I like a guy like Noel Williams out of Cal. I think he's a guy that could be there with that 3rd round pick. The 4th round pick comes right after it. So they're going to be able to kind of get guys probably with similar values on their board. So also Quincy Riley from Louisville is a cornerback that makes a lot of sense. I think this is where you got to start thinking about right tackle with McGarry. I think he's got 2 years on his contract, but again, your right tackle, I mean, you've got a lefty quarterback, and so you got to make sure your right tackle, is able to hold up in pass protection with your franchise quarterback. So I do think the right tackle position starts to make a lot of sense here. Chase Lunt out of UConn is a guy that I think just makes perfect sense as a right tackle. So maybe not with the 1st pick, but maybe with the 2nd pick at 118. So again, they're going to have 2 picks come off the board right there, 20 picks between the two, I believe, or a little bit less than that. So I think right tackle and cornerback make a lot of sense. I wouldn't say no to a defensive tackle. I think Jaylen Walker from Kentucky, we talked about him a lot on the pod during the season. You bring in a nose tackle, that's where you can get great value from a nose tackle, and we know that he's one of the best run stoppers in the SEC. So I think it makes a lot of sense if he's still on the board there. Bring him in, because that is the biggest question mark now on defense is can you avoid 3rd and short situations? So you bringing a guy like that can go a long way into freeing up blockers for your new 1st round pick and Jaylen Walker to run free and find the ball carrier.
The 2nd round will get underway at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Friday night. The Cleveland Browns have the 1st pick, the 33rd overall pick in the draft. And you can follow along over on Dogs247.com. We will have our NFL draft live thread going. It was pretty wild last night, especially by the time the Falcons were picking. So I hope y'all will join us over there on Dogs247.com. We will take a quick break, come back, talk a little bit about some recruiting news for Georgia, and also talk about Georgia basketball and Georgia baseball. right, Ben, we had some news this week as far as commitment dates. A couple changes with Jackson Cantwell and Malcolm Gadsden, a couple of high priority offensive linemen that the Georgia Bulldogs are going after. What can you tell us about those changes and maybe what we should glean from the two changes we saw?
Well, they changed their dates for different reasons, but I will say in both cases, I think it's evidence that Georgia has a lot more control over some of these recruitments than people sometimes give Georgia credit for. Like the Jackson Cantwell, 5-star offensive lineman, Nixa, Missouri, is set to make a decision on April 30th. We come to find out that he's going to push it back 2 weeks, May 13th, and he's going to take a visit to Georgia on May 10th. I got to admit, this was a pretty shocking development when we found this out because, look, you're not finding in this era where you've got, I mean, he's represented by Drew Rosenhaus's agency. They have a firm grasp over this recruitment, and, you know, it's going to go the way you would think it would when you're represented by Rosenhaus's agency and you're the best offensive tackle in the country. And so because of that, I really didn't expect there to be much changes. Like I thought it was one of these things where they had kind of, you know, figured everything out. They were going to take this last visit to Oregon. They'd had all the conversations that they needed to have, and that it would be a pretty easy decision. He just, you know, makes whatever his decision is on April 30th. Well, the fact that he's pushing this back, I don't know. I wasn't feeling one type of way versus the other in terms of Georgia's chances when it was set at April 30th. I thought, you know, Georgia had confidence, and I think that what we've seen now probably leads to some of that confidence was coming from. But, I thought that Miami had valid reasons, and he'd gone to see them, and Mario Cristobal recruits offensive line better than anybody does, and they were going to prioritize them. You know, Oregon speaks for itself from the track and field standpoint, and the fact that he was going to take an official visit out there, and Oregon being what Oregon is. And so, you know, I thought that there were valid reasons for all three parties, and everyone just throws Ohio State to the side there. But when you talk to Jackson or the people representing Jackson, like Ohio State's name never gets left out of the conversation when you're talking to them. And I think that's an important thing to bring up too, because I think it's just like a foregone conclusion that he's not going to Ohio State, which is the defending national champions. Like it's probably a little bit ridiculous to just completely disregard them whatsoever in the conversation. But the other three have definitely had the lion's share of the conversation around them. And so, you know, I thought it could have gone either way April 30th. Now that it's May 13th and the fact that he's squeezing in an unofficial visit to Georgia May 10th, like that's got to be viewed as good news for Georgia. Am I saying Georgia's getting him? No, because I think that if they knew they were getting him for sure, they probably would have just said, hey, just commit on April 30th and we can figure out any other visits or do anything after the fact. So they still got to figure some stuff out because, again, like why would he not just commit on the 30th if they already knew it was Georgia? And so it's interesting, though. Like he hadn't been to Georgia. He wasn't there during the regular season, which I always found interesting. He took a lot of spring trips. Georgia wasn't on that schedule. I always found that interesting. All that said, he's visited Georgia more than he's visited all of these places through the years. And I think that's what's fascinating about Miami's involvement is Miami hasn't really been involved in this recruitment for a long time. They came into it this spring. And so them becoming the team with all the buzz that it seemed like he was trending towards, it sort of came out of nowhere. I won't say nowhere because Mario Cristobal knows offensive line. And so I'm always going to give him that credit where it's due at that position. But I think you got to think of Georgia as the team to beat or the favorite, or I'll put it this way, the team that every other program is terrified of right now. Like if you were to ask the Oregon side, who are you most worried about? They're going to say Georgia. You ask the Miami side, who are you most worried about? They're going to say Georgia. Haven't dug in as much on the Ohio State side because like I said, we're probably just throwing them under the rug in this conversation more than we probably should. But I think if you ask them, they would probably say Georgia as well. We've said time and time again, if this was a recruitment from 10 years ago, Georgia would probably win this recruitment or would have already won this recruitment. It would be done deal. It's more complicated now. We've talked on the Say Wolk show a little bit more about the revenue share side of things. And I think it gets complicated when you talk about this, like when is a guy like Jackson Cantwell going to see the field? How much are you willing to pay year one to an offensive lineman that might not play? And are there some of these other schools where they think he will play year one, and so they're not as concerned about the value of him in year one? These are all difficult conversations to have. It's not just as Jackson Cantwell situation. It's not just a Georgia situation. But like no one's ever really felt like they were operating under a cap before. And like I know we all have questions about whether long-term people are going to feel like they're behaving under a cap. But right now it feels like teams are behaving under a cap heading into this summer. And so I think it makes it, all that more fascinating part of the conversation. But clearly Georgia did something to result in the date being pushed back. And that alone is good news for Georgia. Similarly with Malcolm Gaston, like I think that it's just too early for Georgia to be, filling up. Like the summer official visits are going to be so important for Georgia. And there's so many offensive line targets that are on the board right now. And I do think that Georgia would have likely been the choice for Malcolm Gaston had he committed on May 2nd. I think he wants to push things back just to evaluate all of his options. I know that Georgia, we've talked about it before, how important those in-person, hands-on summer camp evaluations are. Georgia's got a big camp on June 1st, and I think Malcolm Gaston will be there, and I think a lot of other offensive linemen are going to be there as well. And so I think this was just a case of, look, Georgia's in the mix for the number one offensive tackle in the country, and Georgia's full offensive line focus right now needs to be around figuring out the Jackson Cantwell situation before they move forward with anything else. I think there's still a great likelihood that Malcolm Gaston ends up in Georgia's class in the future. I just think it's going to happen after Jackson Cantwell gets sorted out on the offensive line and probably after Georgia is able to get him and some of the other interior offensive line targets in the class on campus this summer to actually work with in camps.
Kipp, any thoughts on specifically the Jackson Cantwell situation, him waiting, and what you feel like that means for Georgia?
Well, I definitely like the fact that Georgia's getting another chance to, show Jackson Cantwell why they're the program he's heavily considered from the beginning. Stacey Searles has spent so much time establishing a relationship with this family. It is still about relationships, and it also just comes back to what Georgia's looking to do with its NIL. And like Ben says, as far as budgeting, like they're in it for some elite players. You still have Jared Curtis on the board, and when you're the number one quarterback in the country or, the top on most boards, that is going to command a huge chunk of that NIL pie. And so what Georgia does with that situation is going to dictate. They're not going to get everyone. I mean, 5 years ago, this is kind of where Georgia fans are kind of not enjoying NIL as much because 5 years ago, 2 or 3 of these guys are already committed to Georgia. Jackson Cantwell, Jared Curtis, I think they're already in Georgia's class under different situation. And Tyler Atkinson, they're not going to be able to get all 3 of those guys. And so it's a situation where you have to decide. These are premium positions. Do you want an elite offensive tackle? Do you want an elite quarterback? I think the answer would probably be yes for Georgia, but knowing you can't bring in everyone, they were already having to make really tough decisions in the past. I always talked about that in position rooms when you're talking about scholarship numbers and position coaches just arguing and not wanting to be in that room because it's obviously heated. Bringing in, budget and cap like NFL style and having to figure out how you're going to do that just adds a layer to that I can't imagine the position coaches, actually winning the recruitment, but, getting vetoed at the end. So I think it's a interesting dynamic, but I also think if you're Georgia, you're right where you want to be. You got anytime you're bringing a guy back in, that means that you get to kind of handle things on your terms. I mean, they're going to tell Jackson Cantwell exactly where they stand. And if they're the last team that gets to talk to in person, even better. But I think that back and forth is a new aspect of recruiting where you kind of, being the last person might actually have more value now. Before, teams were always, they started jockeying to be the first guy on the board with the July official visits. You wanted to be like June 1st or May 30th. And now it's like, okay, let's make sure we're the last person they talk to before they make this decision. So I like where Georgia stands with Jared Curtis and Jackson Cantwell right now. But let's do the pod again in a couple of weeks and see where we're at then, because that is definitely where recruiting is now, and that's exactly why I might be the first person to pull up to Stay Wolk whenever he posts it every morning, because it's like it's a must read now, because you know that what you read last week might not be what you read this week.
I also had it put it to me this way, like you talked about, all right, if you take a guy like Cantwell, does it sacrifice you on Curtis or Atkinson or Mark Bowman or whoever else it is that Georgia values as like these high money recruitments? But you also you can't just think of it in those terms. You got to think of it as like, do you want KJ Bolden back for his junior year? Like, do you want Elijah Griffin for his sophomore and junior year? Like, these guys that they've gotten in the past that they want to retain, like that's all part of it that gets involved too. And like, the other issue is like, not everybody in the room has the same opinion on everything. Like, it's just like NFL draft rooms. Like, different people have different opinions, and different position coaches are advocating more for their groups at specific points in time because of where their depth charts are. And look, it's a much more complicated, I think it is at least a much more complicated conversation than it was even 6 months ago in terms of how you're trying to build this roster and what you have to sacrifice to be able to get what else you want talent-wise.
You bring up a great point too. Our breakout drafts. I mean, we basically screwed Georgia because, when Xavier McLeod, Monroe Friendly, when my guys break out this fall, like I predicted, well, the price of the brick just went up. I mean, that's exactly when you have the number one roster, when you bring in the recruiting classes, you also take in the fact that they might not play immediately, but then they'll break out in year 2 and year 3. And that's just part of the business now.
And to something Kipp said a few minutes ago with like implementing a salary cap, working with a salary cap is one thing. Implementing it when you already have a roster of 90, 120, whatever Georgia's roster is. I mean, think about that. Like, that is where to me, it really gets complicated. What Ben was just pointing out, you have to factor in guys already on your roster, how you're going to navigate that. It is a super complicated situation. And it's something where, to me, for years and years, people talked about the amount of money that college coaches make and how absurd the head coaching contracts were. And they make a lot of money, but it's hard to argue they're not earning it these days, just because these are some very tough situations and tough conversations they have to have just to make the money work and just to put together a good roster. Be sure to stay tuned to Dogs 24/7. Stay woke, like Kipp was saying. Ben does such a good job covering the recruitment of all these guys, and it'll be something to follow in the days to come. All right, Georgia men's basketball minute. This is really going to be a short one. Not a lot going on right now on the Georgia front. We're kind of all waiting to see what a Caden Lewis does. 4-star point guard from Washington, D.C., a guy that Georgia has targeted in the last few weeks. Visited Georgia earlier this week, and by all accounts, it's went well, and I think there is some confidence on the Georgia side, but there's a lot of competition. Villanova is going after him as well. And what to watch right now, as we're recording this, Caden Lewis is on a visit to Miami. Miami with former Georgia assistant Eric Pastrana. I think that has added some interest there. And this is Georgia's biggest need right now is point guard. They got to get another point guard in. There's a lot to like about a Caden Lewis, former Kentucky commit. My understanding is that Georgia doesn't have anyone visiting this weekend, and I think all eyes are on the Caden Lewis to see what happens there, and if Miami is able to make this thing a little bit more complicated, or if Georgia's in good standing as they get ready to try to put together the final pieces of this roster. All right, final thing I wanted to get to before we end this episode. Quick note on Georgia baseball. Been kind of a rough stretch for the Bulldogs. Lost 8-6 to Oklahoma on Thursday. Get ready to play Oklahoma again in Athens, fully filled, 1 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. I'll just throw it to you, Kipp. 5-game losing streak. Are you worried about Georgia? Do you think this is something they can work through? What do you think about how Georgia's playing right now?
Well, they have to figure out how to hit left-handed pitching. I think that's a great place to start. I just think it's I can't believe that the fact that they've lost the last 4 times Brian Curley has started with 2 earned runs, I think every single game, that's got to be maddening for them. So I think right now they just kind of have to get their mojo back. And I think so far it seems like the game going on right now, a good start. And I think if they can pull this one off, it's like we said, just like with Georgia's football season, and even more so. I mean, this slate of SEC baseball can be very humbling quickly. And I think that's kind of where Georgia is right now is, they came in, to the month, one of the hottest teams in baseball, top 5 in most rankings. And now, you're on a losing streak. So I think it's manageable, but yeah, I think teams are going to throw left-handers at them as many times as they can until they prove them wrong. So they got to string together some runs and hope for the best.
Yeah, Olivia Sayer wrote about the book kind of being out on how to pitch against Georgia, and that left-handed pitching has given them some real issues. Be sure to follow along with Olivia's coverage. As Kipp mentioned, as we're recording this, they've gotten that game against Oklahoma underway. If they can win this series against Oklahoma, I think it's a chance to kind of catch their breath and feel better. But if you lose 2 or 3, and certainly if you get swept at home, lot of inner a lot of conversations need to be had within that team because that would be a very difficult situation. All right, we're going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks everyone who watched this live, everyone who's watching or listening to it after the fact. Go to dogs247.com. Make sure and subscribe. Highly recommend you do it right now. It's been fun following this draft, especially when that Atlanta team winds up coming up close to the board. There's been a lot of conversation there, but we'll have all kinds of stories as more Georgia players are drafted. Follow us on social media, on Twitter. Follow the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also follow us on YouTube, on TikTok. A lot of good content as we continue pushing through what is going to be a very interesting offseason. And for football, men's basketball, and the season still going on for baseball. A lot of good content there. All right, we'll end it right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.